Hitting record. All right. Fantastic. We are recording this session, and it's the fourth in our series on the American Rescue Plan Act and our strategies for prioritizing resources. Today, we're going to cover the fourth tier of the plan. Tiers 1, 2, and 3 are posted online. And Liz, if you wouldn't mind dropping that into the chat as well. For anybody who has not been able to attend thus far, we're posting for free all of the sessions up till today. I'm really excited for today. The fourth tier is where we really start to get into some more longer term planning on how to deploy ARPA resources to generate long-term savings overall. And we're going to get into partnerships. For everybody who has been along for the ride thus far, we created our approach to deploying ARPA resources called 5 for the Future, because we were recognizing among our clients and local governments who we were in conversations with that there are numerous needs for these resources, creating perhaps some tension as you all, as administrators and strategists in your organization, are trying to satisfy needs coming from your elected officials, department heads, and across the board. And this is just a handful of the types of requests that we have for the funds, from immediate deployment for people in need. That was actually tier 1. How do we come up with a strategy to take some portion of the resources following the guidance and make sure that we're identifying the uses of the resources for people who need it immediately, those who are suffering in our communities. On the other hand, we have organizations who are trying to build back their reserves or capital funds. For many of us, we had to use those rainy day funds last year, or at least dip into them to balance the budget. And that's a prudent use of resources. And that actually represented tier 2 of our overall plan, was how to get back to some sense of structural balance and fiscal discipline. Tier 3 we covered last week, which was for those of us who had already come to adopt budgets that included reductions for 2021 before we knew for sure that some of the federal funds were going to come into play. How might we look at midterm budget adjustments or amendments overall? And was it acceptable to just say, hey, we're going to immediately go back and backfill all of the positions or the cuts that we were talking about reducing, and how might we prioritize reinstating any of those planned cuts with ARPA resources? That was tier 3. And today we're going to get into tier 4, and next week is our final installment. But as I mentioned, the tier 4 really starts to represent how we start to look more long-term in the future. If you consider this sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy, tiers 1 through 3 were really how to satisfy our elected officials and our department heads and our residents in our community who have an immediate sense of urgency for receiving relief. And hopefully those first 3 tiers were helpful to you and you had some takeaways on how to approach those strategies. But today we're going to get into tier 4, leveraging partners. The overall idea for tier 4 is recognizing that your organization is receiving these funds, and so are others in your region. And so the big picture concept is, how might we look at our partners and recognize that, wow, this is an incredible opportunity where they're receiving resources, we're receiving resources. Maybe together we can do things that weren't previously available to our communities. We could combine resources and try to tackle some large solutions overall. And while that sounds really compelling, it's not so easy to do. Where are these proposals coming from? Who is receiving resources in your community? Do we know who they are? We have heard from some of our clients where other entities are not receiving resources. And so it's less about how do we combine and pool our funds to tackle something large, but instead, how do we rescue another entity who might be so strapped, they might go out of business and we might have to take over providing the services that they're providing. That's the story in Pittsburgh with their parking authority, who is not receiving funding, and the city is worried if they go bust, the city would have to absorb the services provided. So that's a different way to look at partnerships, is throwing out a lifeline overall. But in today's session, we're going to tackle two really big ideas as we think about partnerships. And I'm going to reference, and I'll post these links here in just a second. I'm going to reference two documents from GFOA. The first is a November 2020 white paper authored by Shane Kavanaugh, talking about network enterprises. That's what you see in the bottom left there. Shane wrote about this extensively in the GFOA book, Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities. And the whole concept of network enterprises is that there are other entities within your community who might share the pursuit of similar objectives as your organization. And if they have resources and you have resources, and you're both trying to tackle something, perhaps together, you can combine forces and really make a huge impact. Thanks a lot, Liz, for dropping that chat in the link. In that paper about network enterprises, you'll see a chart like this, and I just thought this was illustrative of the point we're trying to make, where you see objectives like education or environment or wellness. And in one of the highlight case studies, San Bernardino County, California, reached out and created this network of enterprises. That's what the term is meant to describe, from the private sector, from nonprofits, and from the public sector, including but not limited to San Bernardino. And so as they were trying to identify who all the potential players are, this approach to network enterprises was a phenomenal approach. So the basic idea is we're trying to pursue a common result. How do we band together, pool our resources, and do better than maybe we would have on our own? There's a second concept as we talk about Tier 4 in the use of ARPA resources and partnerships, and that's what we have referred to as government as a platform. And in the latest April government finance review, Shane Kavanaugh and I authored an article about government as a platform. And in this case, it's not so much about pooling resources for a common result, but instead, how do you identify among all the potential service providers in your region where there are optimization opportunities? So regional collaborations and partnerships where we can use ARPA resources in this case to create multi-jurisdictional or consolidated service areas and actually save money. So this one, government as a platform, is about regional optimization, whereas network enterprises is more about banding together to solve common results. And both of these big ideas are what is at the core of today's training. How do we approach these types of solutions overall? We realize many of you on the call are current priority-based budgeting implementers or in various stages of implementation. And some of you are brand new. So we will also do our best as we go through today's training to identify what data you might want to bring to bear, what data you can build as a prerequisite to start to approach these types of big ideas overall. I did want to spend just two more slides drilling into this government as a platform and regional optimization of resources concept for just a second, because we're going to introduce a large objective that will carry through Tier 4 for ARPA resources and into Tier 5. For those of you who have been around priority-based budgeting for quite some time, you will recognize that one of the skill sets that we promote, that we are really hoping that all local government leaders are able to master, is that of resource repurposing or resource reallocation. And this slide is rewinding the tape back to 2019, when we had honored the first 10 organizations or so who had demonstrated resource reallocation of upwards of 10% of their operating budgets. And we thought that was remarkable. If you think about that, they had found ways to partner differently, find program efficiencies, or change their approach to service levels in order to repurpose internally over 10% of their budget. And that is an ongoing, recurring source of ongoing resources to fund new needs in the future. And we thought, man, that is, if all local governments can master this type of capability, repurposing or reallocating somewhere around 10% of their budget, then maybe we wouldn't be victim of falling short of having resources on hand to tackle massive challenges of tomorrow, like whether it's responding to COVID, homelessness, or climate action, equity in so many of our communities today. This is a hugely important skill set that we hope everyone's able to master. Well, how does this fit into what we were just talking about in government as a platform? We measured last year and published for the first time in our annual report year-to-year resource reallocations of some of our top performing priority-based budgeting implementers. And Liz, you can, if you drop that in the chat as well, I'd appreciate it. But what you're seeing here is from one year to the next, how much of their budget a number of communities were able to repurpose. And you see some of them are all the way up here at 11% resource reallocation, which is totally awesome. But even, looking at Alexandria, Virginia, 2% reallocation is still representing $38 million of their budget. That is a huge source of ongoing resources now made available to provide new services or enhance other programs that they are providing overall. Thanks a lot, Liz. Well, what we thought was really fascinating was if you start to compare what some of these communities are receiving by way of ARPA resources. Here's Shawnee, Kansas, and this is an estimate from National League of Cities. They're set to receive about 7.5 million over here on the left-hand side from ARPA. These are one-time resources. And over here, you see Shawnee with their 11% resource reallocation had made available for 2021 about twice that at 15 million. That's twice the amount of ARPA support overall. If we look at East Lansing, Michigan, they're receiving about 12 million from the rescue plan, and their reallocation mark is about 8%. So it's on par, in this case, a little bit less. Here's Salem, Oregon, 25 million from their resource reallocation, 34 million from ARPA. Here's the big objective, or the big concept. Everybody's talking about these are one-time resources coming in from ARPA, and our hope is that, wow, we can use these resources for the greatest good. One way that we might use these resources is to find ways, one-time investments that we can make that create ongoing, sustainable, reallocated resources as if you were receiving the benefit of ARPA every year. And that is something that we're extremely interested in. If we could use these one-time resources to invest in programmatic change, whether these are partnerships, ways to consolidate the way that you provide certain services, and create for yourself a source of abundance, of ongoing reallocated resources to fund new things in the future, might we be able to come close to achieving the magnitude of ARPA resources coming back to you every single year. So this is one of the themes we'll return to at the end of today's presentation, but we hope that it's a compelling goal that you can set for your own organization, or strive to achieve some portion of ARPA every year as you consider this long-term investment strategy that we're getting into in Tier 4. All right, so just like we've done with Tiers 1 through 3, we've tried to set up a problem statement to frame what we're going to approach. So our goal, whether it's ARPA every year, or said a little bit more simply, seize the opportunity to discover and execute on partnership opportunities with regional organizations in pursuit of common objectives who are heavily resourced. This is our objective overall. We recognize there are some basic challenges. One, while the concept of leveraging partners makes total sense to everybody, it's not always entirely easy to discover the specific partnership opportunities that you might have in your region. Where would you start? We recognize that that can be a barrier, and we're going to talk about how to overcome that barrier and that challenge. Second, we look back at 2020 and when partnerships were actually most beneficial for communities who didn't have enough resources to provide our basic services. This was the greatest opportunity, perhaps, to actually band together with neighbors and pool resources and share in the provision of common services overall. We recognize that even last year when it was needed the most, partnerships were still hard to come by. They're hard to execute. And everybody knows this who's worked in local government. There are good reasons why partnerships are hard, even when we seek them. There are control issues, there's legality issues. You might not trust other partners overall. So we want to talk about those challenges as well. Our approach and what we'll cover for today, number one, we're going to get into where are your best opportunities for partnerships? How do you discover them? Once you identify a partnership opportunity, what is going to be your execution plan? And three, even with a great execution plan for a perfect partnership, how will you make sure that this gets funded in the budget process? At the very end, we'll make sure to hit timeline considerations for those of you who need to take action on some of these strategies overall. How do you get your data together as soon as possible? And we will take it from here. I'm showing you one of our government as a platform highlight stories comes from Washington County, Wisconsin. And so we're just dropping in this slide as well, some of the things that they've done with what they call counties without borders. And we'll share some of those stories as we go along today. Okay, so let's dig into it. One of the very first and most important techniques that we want you to think about and have as a takeaway today is something that we call program mapping. And at its simplest, it is coming to understand the programs that you offer. What do you provide within your community overall? And then thinking more regionally, what are the programs that other entities provide in your region? Do we know who's out there? Do we know what they provide? And if we can discover those two things, then where might we have opportunities to band together and provide programs in partnership with one another? So we're trying to make the approach very practical, and program mapping has again and again for us proven to be a tremendously practical and powerful tool. One of the communities we did program mapping with is a small county in Colorado called Clear Creek County. What you're looking at here on the screen, Clear Creek County developed their program inventory, a list of the services that they provide. And by way of a program mapping workshop, which is part of the technique as well, what you're looking at in that picture is they simply reached out and invited nonprofits, public sector, the school district was there, a host of nonprofits and special districts showed up. They also had private sector partners come together. And what the people are doing at their tables and on their computers are observing and reviewing the program inventory from Clear Creek County's perspective and simply trying to match up, identifying where they provide a common service or they provide a service with a similar objective. So that would create those nodes of connection among all community partners overall, not only to create optimization opportunities, but back to the networked enterprises and San Bernardino County story overall, also find where they could band together in pursuit of a common goal. There were 40 different organizations across this very small county. And I'm choosing to start with this story as a lead because if a small entity like Clear Creek County can pull this off, getting 40 organizations together for an afternoon and identifying those common programs across the region, my guess is that it can work for your organization as well. And we've seen it in a couple other stories in larger organizations too, and I'll get into those. For data, what was mind-blowing as a result of Clear Creek County's program mapping exercise, this chart is busy, but I'll get to the punchline. If you think of their entire budget, the entire Clear Creek County budget, 79% of that budget is allocated to programs that other entities provide according to that workshop overall. So 79% of the budget for Clear Creek County is associated with programs that others were interested in partnering with them, maybe sourcing to Clear Creek County, or vice versa, if there was a value proposition the other way. But the takeaway for the county administrator was you might start off thinking, yeah, there might be a few partnership opportunities overall, but some of the things that we do, there's just nobody else out there who does it. The takeaway that 79% of the budget is allocated to programs where there are other service providers overall is eye-opening, to say the least. And that's what we want to be able to take advantage of, is this ginormous opportunity. We've analyzed across the priority-based budgeting community how big this opportunity might actually be. And when we look on average across everybody we've ever worked with, if this pie chart is representing your entire budget, 60% on average for our organizations of your budget is tied in programs that are offered by others. So at the bare minimum, it's saying you do have opportunities. Maybe over 50% of your budget is on the table for discovery of regional optimization opportunities or banding together in pursuit of a common objective, with about 40% maybe being where you are going it alone. And then for the 40% of your budget that's tied up in programs that only you are providing, the question still remains, should we be providing those programs? But that's a question for a different discussion in priority-based budgeting. Today, we're just going to focus on that 60% because we're looking at the use of ARPA resources to now explore what we could do to create partnership opportunities for this large portion of your budget that exists. So let's get into program mapping as a technique and how you actually do it. What we're looking for are those very practical partnerships that everybody knows about, but are sometimes hard to discover. Our very first story, just to plant the seed of the types of win-win situations that we're trying to identify, comes from the city of Englewood, Colorado. This is also heavily detailed in Shane's description and the paper that we authored on government as a platform and in financial foundations as well. So you take your city, you take city of Englewood, Colorado here as a case study. They provide fleet services. Almost every organization provides fleet services. As you look outward from Englewood, there are a host of smaller entities, like here's the city of Sheridan, here's the city of Cherry Hills Village, and both of those cities also have fleet services operations. And from both of their perspectives, it's hard to keep up. Fleet is expensive, and when you're a small community, it can be a burden on the organization for those types of internal governance services overall. But what Englewood put on the table, and Eric Keck is on the line. Eric Keck is former city manager of Englewood, Colorado, and this is what he was able to pull off, was a basic regional fleet operation where for Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village, it was actually cheaper for them to pay Englewood than to maintain their own fleet. And for Englewood, yes, they had to put in a one-time investment to build out a regional fleet operation, so an expansion of what they were currently doing. But if you looked at the one-time costs compared to the revenue increase overall, it was a win-win situation for Englewood. It would be beneficial economically for the long run, using one-time money to create an ongoing source of new resources that exceeds the one-time investment is the exact type of strategy that we would hope that you would consider for the use of ARPA resources, leveraging partners, just like Englewood is doing right here. I mentioned Washington County, Wisconsin, and how they're in Shane's book. Their approach to this program mapping idea and the partnerships they created with something they called Counties Without Borders. So I know we have Chester County, we have Durham County on the line, and perhaps some others. So in Washington County, they created their program inventory, and they simply reached out to counties at their borders in what they call the Counties Without Borders initiative overall, and shared their program inventory data just like Clear Creek County did, and invited the other public sector entities to match up and say, hey, is there a partnership opportunity that we could create? Two that were highlights. One was about a merged health department with Owazaki County, one of their neighbors, as you can see there to the east. And combining health departments is not a brand new idea, but they came together. When they did merge their health departments, they found that they had numerous redundant positions. They did not lay off the staff, but instead eliminated the redundancy in the tasks, thereby freeing up staff capacity to do other programs that neither one of the entities was able to do without having to ask the citizens for more resources overall. So by coming together, you find the efficiencies, you reallocate the staff, you're now able to provide new programs and a higher level of service without actually bringing in more money to either one of those entities overall. So this example is far more in line with Shane's network enterprise example, less about saving money and creating ARPA every year, more about banding together to create a common pursuit of shared objectives. The story from Washington County in 2020 was that by virtue of their health departments coming together, they were able to provide contact tracing and other COVID response efforts that were on par or better than nearby Milwaukee County, which was far more abundantly resourced. So it's a tremendous story of what you can do when you pull those partnerships off. So overall, our goal in program mapping is how can we create more Inglewood fleet opportunities in counties without borders? And this is how we have endeavored to create a program mapping opportunity where entrepreneurially your mindset is, where can we be an insourcing provider? Inglewood Fleet is the example where we're looking out to our neighbors and we know that if they pay us, we can boost our own revenues overall. It might cost us a little bit of one-time investment, but we're going to be bringing in more resources to the organization. And if we can do that, we're on our way to creating ARPA every year. So your Inglewood Fleet in that situation. Opportunistically, there's another way to look at the types of solutions that are on the table. And in this case, put yourself in the shoes of Cherry Hills Village. Where are there partners who are already set up to handle a particular service where you could outsource to them and get some costs off of your plate? Or if you're Clear Creek County and you see 79% of your budget's tied up in programs that others are providing, where can you share the load or allow other entities to go ahead and take over the provision of some of those services overall? And our realization is we need a map first and foremost to identify what we're doing, the programs that we provide, and match up with those entities around us. And this is something that's really easy to pull off. We've seen it again and again after a program mapping workshop is what it takes. Englewood, Colorado did this with one of their neighbors, Littleton, Colorado. So this is a simple example of two cities sharing their program inventory data. So here's community development in the city of Englewood, and they're sharing it here with the city of Littleton, Colorado. They got together, just like you saw in Clear Creek County, looking for a program matchup opportunity, sharing their program inventory data with one another. And you would see simple things like, hey, they're both in the snow removal business. This was one of our portals that we use for program mapping. So Littleton's in snow removal business, Englewood's in snow removal business, and they're wondering, is there an opportunity to come together and find an efficiency? And then one of the other just kind of takeaway stories, as you looked at Englewood's utilities department, this was a comment from Littleton city manager, Mark Ralph, is like his breakthrough moment came when he was looking at utility billing and collections, the way that they bill their customers. And he said, sometimes from a pursuit of partnership perspective, we start to focus on the most complex and controversial programs, and that's what leads to this power struggle or the control issues that often prevent partnerships from working. And Mark Ralph, as he was looking at utility billing, said, there's no hometown pride in the way that Littleton provides utility billing or that Inglewood provides utility billing. It's just a basic service. We need to get the bills out the door and collect and make sure that we're appropriately running our utility. So that was his comment. There's no unique community character in how we provide this. This partnership just makes sense. That's what we're looking for overall. And that's one of our tips to you as you're trying to break the conventional wisdom that partnerships don't work because there are control issues. Our advice is maybe we can start with programs where there isn't a whole lot of hometown pride from one entity to the other. So maybe not starting with merged fire services overall, but taking on utility billing or fleet or something of that nature. One other quick story to share is Moffat County, Colorado. And they launched a program mapping exercise as well. Again, super small remote organization. That's why the story is interesting to us, because we wondered in Moffat County, I don't know, if you're not from Colorado, you probably don't know where this place is. If you've ever heard of Steamboat, Colorado, which is a popular ski resort, Steamboat is in Routt County. Routt County is a beautiful part, northwestern Colorado. Moffat County's further off to the west, which is where you land when you become lost and you missed the exit for Steamboat. So we wondered, Moffat County has a program inventory, but are there even any other potential service providers out there who they can partner with? And sure enough, they found them. So they convened a program matchup, a program mapping exercise over the course of an afternoon with the county seat, City of Craig, their school district, their local community college, and also their hospital, Northern Colorado Hospital overall, Memorial Regional Hospital, that is. And one of the fascinating things from the Moffat County story is that the hospital director, as he was scanning through Moffat County's programs, noticed that the county provided laundry facilities. This is a program from the program inventory that you get from your programmatic data. And as the hospital director was showing interest in this particular program, his point was, at the hospital, they have not built their own laundry facility. It's quite expensive, and they ship their laundry every week, 2.5 hours from Craig, Colorado, where Moffat County is, down to Grand Junction, where they have found the closest nearby laundry facility to take on this particular demand from the hospital. Hospital has huge demand for laundry, for what it's worth. And then they look over and see, wow, never did we come to understand that right across the street in our county government, they're also providing laundry, and they have a sheriff's department that had a laundry facility and in a nursing home overall. So this was hundreds of thousands of dollars to the hospital every year annually in their budget that they would gladly reinvest locally. And so this is a perfect example. One-time resources to create that partnership and execute. And that's what we would advocate in program mapping overall. We do offer a program mapping approach with your program inventory data. And if this is something that you are interested in, it is something that we would be very excited to talk you through. And if you are able to pull this off on your own, you have your own program inventory, you want to set up a workshop locally, it's very easy to do. Take your inventory data, do it just like you saw in Clear Creek. That's why I included the slides, and take your approach to just sharing data and trying to come up with those Inglewood fleet examples, or Washington County Without Borders. All right. I want to transition to a second strategy, and that is using your basic priority-based budgeting program data and tagging programs in an effective way that's going to lead you to program opportunities for partnerships overall. So I won't go in great detail through the priority-based budgeting process, but just wanted everybody to remember from the last few workshops, we've talked about a baseline set of data, a program inventory that you're creating, line item allocation to those programs so we know what they cost, and then tagging programs with basic program attributes, as well as their impact on your results. That's what priority-based budgeting is all about. And I just point you to, if you want a crash course in this, the first three webinars in our series, we did a brief crash course in priority-based budgeting. It's also covered in the April Government Finance Review. But where I want to get to is this opportunity to tag programs with anything, basic program attribute data. And one of the key attributes that we would ask current PBB implementers to go back and look at, or new implementers to make sure that you're tagging your programs with these, is the degree of reliance that other entities have on you as a service provider, because we can filter on this and come up with new opportunities to look for partnerships. And I'm going to toggle out really quickly and show you the end result of what this can begin to look at. And I'll expand my screen just a little bit here. And I want to take you to Boise, Idaho, because they did a really good job. We showed Boise in our Tier 1 strategy because they had tagged their programs with a certain basic program attribute that was around vulnerable populations. And they also have reliance. So in Boise, they're able to say, I want to look at programs that are already geared towards benefiting our vulnerable, disadvantaged, or most at-risk portions of our community overall. And I also want to look at opportunities where there are other possible service providers, whether they are private sector or public sector. And I can come up and see, wow, it looks like there are a lot of possible opportunities here. If I look at specific programs, we are seeing, there's a host of them, from pre-K to community centers to homebound services, home ownership loans. This is a filtering technique based on your program inventory data to drill down into those programs where they're already aligned with serving the most vulnerable communities, and the reliance is low, meaning there have been identified other possible partners. And as we come in and we can see what some of these programs are, Boise has immediately sub-selected their first opportunities. Here's rental housing, here's home improvement loans, permanent housing loans, home ownership loans. So if you're in Boise's shoes and you've already put this data together, we have our initial take on where you're going to find these partnership opportunities to execute. And the hope is, as I move into the recommendation here, is that you would create or conduct what we call a program insight workshop, which is similar to a program mapping workshop, but it can be done internally. And the idea is finding or discovering those programs that you want to be able to take action on, tagging them, and starting to work through execution plans overall. What are we going to do differently to use our ARPA resources as a proposal to change the way that we're providing these programs, or to identify where a partnership might exist where we want to go in together with another entity. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania did an insight workshop recently, and that's where I'm drilling into some of their data. It's 3 stages in nature, and phase 1 includes starting with that program inventory. So if you're Boise and I'm a department head in Boise or a participant, I've now drilled down, I see the programs that I'm really interested in taking action on, and now I want to put a proposal on the table. Drew from Durham County talked about this last week. Was first and foremost, how do you get these proposals on the table? How do we get a legitimate plan for something that we might do with the ARPA resources? And then how might we prioritize them, which I'll get into in just a moment, in the budget process. So in Pittsburgh, what you're looking at, this is their program inventory. So if I had a particular program, we were just looking at homelessness in Boise. So I can look for the exact same thing here in Pittsburgh. I would create my program insight. This is step 1. We're trying to get all ideas on the table. and say, what might we do for this particular opportunity? And here I might enter in my description on banding together with the county and various nonprofits to execute on our homelessness initiative. This is flexible in the tools for those of you who are thinking of tackling insights this way, where we have degree of complexity. So is this going to be very politically sensitive? This is getting to the issue of utility billing is an easy partnership to create, but merging fire departments might be a little bit harder. And then timeline considerations. Is this something that's going to take us a while to implement? We're just trying to get the participants' opinion on how complicated the execution plan might be. I will be talking about leveraging partners. This is a sourcing idea, and then including the budget impact. And this is really important, where we are demonstrating that there are one-time cost considerations. So if I'm vying for ARPA resources in my solution, I might say, yes, this is identified as a $500,000 $5 million one-time investment, and our hope is that we would generate ongoing returns overall. So I'm just trying to get some very basic information on the table to go ahead and add my insight and contribute it to you all as decision makers. Your hope is to gather as many of these possible ideas as possible, because this is what you're going to be wanting to sift through in consideration of the use of your ARPA resources. I won't go through all the details here, but just so you can see, in Pittsburgh's case, they then moved into a recommend phase where there are specific questions to drill down into the execution plan. Who needs to be involved? Are there any legal considerations to take notice of? Do we need council approval? Will this impact any known mandates? These are the types of execution questions that you can incorporate to refine that insight that you're putting together. And then the final stage of an insight workshop is getting some feedback from your peers. Is this a really good idea? Should we move forward with it? Should we approve it? Are there requests to revise this idea? Can we scale it up across the organization? What can we take into consideration here? So the approval phase is pretty neat. It could just be limited to you and your decision makers to give some feedback in your process overall. This is where you're going to be selecting these to move forward into a budget process, denying some of the ideas that maybe aren't sketched out completely enough, or asking for some more specific revisions overall. And then what this is able to produce finally is a simple report. So if I'm in your shoes, you want to be getting these proposals from your own organization, potentially opening the door for others to participate, and you want the details on the execution plan overall, so that you can consider them with your board, with your elected officials, and try to find out, is this something we can actually move forward with? So this is just an example of, here's document and record retention digitization, where there are multiple agencies participating, and they're looking at an efficiency overall. The last item I wanted to touch on, so we've now identified, you've put your program data together, you've done an insight workshop, and now we want to move something into an actual budget process. As you're considering ARPA resources, it's very possible that this is some sort of off-budget process. It's an ARPA specific budget development consideration where people are competing for these resources overall. We are also able to tackle proposals in budget development. And that was the last thing I wanted to show you. I think I can do it pretty quickly, so we would still have some opportunity for questions here in just a second. So here I'm confronted with the exact same programs. If I want to put something on the table for budget consideration, maybe I am thinking of that fleet consolidation opportunity we were just discussing for Inglewood. So now I'm attaching my proposal to the fleet program. And so the idea is regional fleet operations. And I'm going to say this is something that has an impact on various results that I'm intrigued with, ARPA related. So this might have a high impact on climate as we're more efficient in the way that we do our fleet consolidation. Maybe we are also transitioning some of our vehicles to EV or something like that. Impact on equity might have some impact. And overall, this is a program change that will be revenue generating. And I put together the very first program-oriented request. From a personnel perspective, maybe I am adding a new heavy equipment repair specialist, or like 10 of them overall. So I'm trying to demonstrate for you how we're taking the current costs of this program and I'm adding personnel to the program overall. I'd go to non-personnel and I might add some, I have got operational supplies here. You're going to need a new facility, and that request is going to be $1 million for the consolidated fleet. And I'm saving my budget request overall. Where I wanted to get to is showing in the refinement stage. I can go to my heavy equipment fleet consolidation idea, pull together specific questions for refinement, just like you would do in a normal budget development process. Save my recommendation. And then finally, as we get to how do you prioritize all of these ARPA requests, we want to be able to show the total requested versus what is actually being approved. And here's where I'm demonstrating various requests that are on the table from a priority perspective. That's what the quartiles are in priority-based budgeting, as well as their impact on climate or equity, or some of your other results. This is what you're going to want to be evaluating as you're saying yes or no to various ARPA requests. And then finally, this can be downloaded into what are the details on the approved budget requests that you are now hoping are going to get funded with your ARPA money, with one-time resources, creating ongoing abundance overall. I'm coming to a close. I just was downloading this for the sake of showing you what you're going to get at the end. We have all of our programs, what was requested, what was accepted, and their impacts from the approved standpoint on your various accounts, so that you can use this to actually connect back to your budget overall. So your personnel budget and your non-personnel overall. All right. I'm wrapping up here, I promise. I'm going to close down the demo screen, and we have covered the ARPA-driven budget development process. I want to do a recap. So our goal was to identify where our best opportunities for partnerships. We talked about a program mapping approach, which is the simplest, taking your program inventory data, inviting community partners together and doing a program matchup to identify where these opportunities could exist. Once you identify a partnership, what is the execution plan? We talked about the insight workshop to take programmatic ideas like we saw in Boise or in Pittsburgh and attach a recommendation to those, like we did with the homelessness program, walk through execution plan questions overall and generate a list of recommendations. And then even with the various possible proposals on the table from within your organization or outside, how do we get those funded in the budget? And we did a quick crash course on how to take the recommendation, consider one-time versus ongoing costs, and actually conduct a budget development process overall. If you do not have programmatic data, this is a recommendation that we have been trying to highlight. We have many of the ARPA audience members taking some interest. We have a class. It's 4 classes. Each of these classes are no longer than 90 minutes, and we're conducting them June 7th through June 9th, where we're going to talk about each of the elements of program inventory creation, costing actually, basic program attribute assignment, and scoring versus results, and how to take action. It'll be a little bit longer than the 1 hour that you've spent with me today. Eric Keck will also talk about cultural aspects from your organization. And finally, we want you to have everything that you might need to consider building your program inventory, your priority-based budgeting data overall. And that is more or less where I wanted to land. I think the final punchline that I'm just going to bring back up on the screen was this idea that in tier 4, as we are considering other partners in the region, if it is at all possible to strive for one-time investment to create ongoing resource liquidity, this would be a magnificent goal, and we hope that you approach it in a similar fashion. But we'd love to hear some of your takeaways or questions while we still have about 5 minutes left. Please feel free to come off of mute. And if you don't have questions also, or you can drop them in the chat, any comments as well as you're thinking about your approach to finding these partnerships overall, would love to hear what some of your organizations are doing. Thanks, Rosemary.
Chris, this is Drew in Durham. I have, as we've been thinking about partnerships, I know, and wanting to kind of organize our own spending, we are conscious of the fact that Treasury guidance is still coming out and changing, and we're also conscious of, outside of ARPA, a lot of other kind of additional pieces of federal aid coming our way, and so I think there's kind of a tension between trying to plan early and quickly and be active now, and then waiting for things to kind of settle out and to see where all the requirements are and to see who has in fact gotten what, so that we don't, end up planning for Project X with ARPA funds only to find out, not that this would be an impossible situation, right? But to find out that we have a better funding mechanism that comes out, 2 or 3 months later.
Drew, I think that's a incredibly important perspective. And one of the reasons we wanted to get this framework out there as soon as we did is if you can at least envision that this is the correct strategy for you, or along the lines of a good way to start to think about the use of your resources for what you might want to fund, you would have your strategy in place while you're then starting to incorporate the funding guidance. Right. We've done the same thing. We issued an initial position paper that outlines the 5 tiers. And then Liz, I think you posted this earlier, but it added a significant amount of guidance based on what Treasury had issued overall and what's eligible, what's not eligible. In our first overview or 101 presentation, we highlighted exactly what you're talking about, that there are new sources of funding that we don't want to be duplicative or redundant or blow it, like use funding from ARPA in one way when there's an infrastructure bill coming out, and we could have funded the infrastructure with this other source of money. And so I think you are right on to say, let's get our basic strategy in place for how we're going to think about prioritizing the resources or taking proposals overall, but give it a little bit of time as the actual Treasury guidance is coming out. The last idea I had, Drew, is we talked about tagging programs, for example, with degree of reliance. Are there other potential partners and so on? Does this impact climate? Does it impact equity? In our tools, whether you're using our tools or you're doing it on your own, the whole point was, can we take a request and apply metadata or just associate certain things? Does it meet Treasury guidance for revenue loss? Does it meet Treasury guidance for the public health COVID response area. Just like you would do in a normal budget development process, that's how we're thinking, as well as using some of those flexible tagging mechanisms to draw attention to the Treasury guidance overall. And that might be another key to the puzzle for every proposal that you're taking in.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, how would you sort and filter on all of those ultimately? Sure, great question. All right, well, there's 2 minutes left. I'm happy to stick around. I think we can bring the recording to a conclusion, and we'll post it on our site and stay in touch with everybody. But just wanted to say thanks a lot for tuning in for Tier 4. And just like Drew said, it's an evolving situation, which is yet one more tension. And